I'm a middle-aged man now, but there's a memory from my youth that still haunts me to this day. Growing up in Ohio, in the 90s, I spent countless hours outdoors with my childhood friend, Trent. We were practically inseparable, always out in the woods, building shelters and practicing our survival skills. Most of our trips were fun and uneventful, just two boys reveling in the freedom of nature. But one adventure changed everything. It started as a typical day. My big sister thought we were crazy, but she dropped us off anyway, right in the middle of the woods. We were excited, armed with nothing but our backpacks and a sense of adventure. The day began perfectly fine. We roamed around, smoked a joint by an old bridge we found, and then decided to move deeper into the forest to set up camp. We chose a thickly forested area near some railroad tracks. It was secluded and perfect for a night under the stars. After setting up our tent, we decided to scout the perimeter, a habit from our many camping trips. That's when we stumbled upon it, an old abandoned church hidden away in the depths of the woods. The building was weathered and decrepit, looking like it had been forgotten by time. The wood was rotting, windows shattered, and the air around it felt heavy, almost oppressive. Both Trent and I felt uneasy, but we decided to set up camp anyway, positioning ourselves on a hill that conveniently blocked the view of the church. Night fell quickly, and with it, an eerie silence blanketed the forest. We were sitting by the campfire, talking and laughing about old times, when we heard it, singing. It was faint at first, barely audible over the crackling fire. We stopped talking and strained our ears. The singing was coming from the direction of the church. Curiosity got the better of us. We grabbed our flashlights and quietly made our way toward the source of the sound. As we neared the church, the singing grew louder, mixed with chanting in a language neither of us recognized. The windows, shattered and dusty, emitted a faint flickering light. We crept closer and peered inside. What we saw chilled us to the bone. Inside the church, a group of figures draped in dark robes were gathered in a circle, chanting and swaying. The leader, a tall figure with a hood obscuring their face, held a book in their hands, reading aloud in that strange language. Shadows danced on the walls, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to move with a life of their own. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. The leader raised their head, and the entire group turned towards the window, as if sensing our presence. We ducked down, our hearts pounding in our chests. When we dared to look again, the figures were filing out of the church, heading in our direction. Panic surged through us. We scrambled back to our campsite and hastily packed our gear. The lights from the figures' torches moved erratically through the trees, growing closer with each passing second. We didn't wait to see what they wanted. We bolted for the railroad tracks, our breath ragged and our bodies fueled by pure adrenaline. The woods around us seemed to close in as we ran. The once familiar tracks now felt like a precarious lifeline. We could hear the figures behind us, their chanting carried on the wind, mixing with the rustling leaves and our own labored breaths. Eventually, we reached a road. We slowed down, trying to catch our breath and gather our wits. The lights and chanting had faded, but the fear still clung to us. We walked along the road until we spotted a small town in the distance. The sight of civilization brought a wave of relief. We found a gas station and called my sister, who thankfully agreed to pick us up. Sitting there under the harsh fluorescent lights of the gas station, we finally began to calm down. But the memory of those figures, their chanting, and the way they seemed to pursue us through the woods remained etched in our minds. When my sister arrived, we tried to explain what had happened, but our words seemed inadequate to convey the terror we felt. She looked skeptical, but didn't press us for details. The drive back home was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. Years have passed since that night, but I still can't shake the feeling of unease whenever I think about it. Trent and I drifted apart after high school, but we've reconnected a few times over the years. Whenever we meet, we always end up talking about that night, trying to make sense of what we saw and heard. Was it some kind of cult? A bizarre ritual? Or something even more sinister? We'll probably never know the truth. All I know is that there's a part of those woods in Ohio that I'll never go back to. That old, abandoned church and the figures that emerged from it remain a dark mystery. A reminder that some things are best left unexplored. I was 16 at the time, and it was the beginning of summer. My girlfriend, Ashley, was always up for an adventure, and this time she had a wild idea that both thrilled and terrified me. She wanted to explore an abandoned hospital that had been closed since 1994. The building was constructed in the 1920s, and we'd heard countless stories about it. Stories that would make anyone's skin crawl, but the lure of the unknown was too strong to resist. One late night, when our parents thought we were safely tucked in bed, we sneaked out to the old hospital. The moon was full, casting eerie shadows as we approached the towering derelict structure. Initially, we couldn't find an entrance, and a gnawing unease settled in my stomach. The hospital loomed over us, its broken windows like empty, soulless eyes staring us down. We circled the building, searching for a way in, the silence of the night amplifying every creak and rustle. Finally, we found a sealed side entrance, with a mix of determination and fear. We broke through it. The door groaned in protest, echoing through the deserted halls as we stepped inside. The interior was a desolate wasteland of shattered glass and broken doors. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of mildew and rot. It was like the building itself was exhaling the ghosts of its past. We began exploring floor by floor. The further we went, the stronger the smell of death became. At first, we thought it was just dead animals, but something about it felt more sinister. We reached the morgue, a large, cold room that sent shivers down my spine. Old medical supplies were scattered about, needles, fluid bags, and stained surgical instruments, remnants of a time when this place had thrived with life and death. As we wandered through the morgue, a sudden chilling sensation swept over us. We both paused, straining to hear. In the suffocating darkness, we thought we heard someone breathing. Panic surged through me. My heart pounded in my chest as I squinted into the shadows, but we couldn't see anything. The air felt thick with an unspoken threat. "We need to get out of here," I whispered to Ashley, and she nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We turned back towards the entrance we had forced open. Our footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, a reminder of our intrusion into this forsaken place. Just as we neared the exit, the sound of footsteps behind us made my blood run cold. Someone, or something, was following us. We didn't dare look back. Instead, we broke into a run, the adrenaline propelling us towards the outside. We burst through the entrance, gasping for air, our hearts racing. Once we were safely outside, a strange mix of relief and exhilaration washed over us. We couldn't stop laughing, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. The thrill of the adventure had momentarily overshadowed the terror we'd felt inside. For a few days, life returned to normal. But then, strange things started happening. It began with Ashley's cat. She showed me a video she had recorded of her cat doing bizarre things, staring intently at corners of the room, harassing at empty air. One night, the cat even attacked her when she tried to pick it up, something it had never done before. Ashley was scared, and I could see the fear growing in her eyes. A week later, my mother mentioned hearing loud noises coming from my room late at night. Despite me having gone to bed early, I hadn't heard anything, but the concern in her voice was unsettling. The weirdness didn't stop there. Objects in our home started moving on their own, small things at first. Books falling off shelves, doors creaking open. But the incidents grew more intense. I began to wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling like someone was watching me. Ashley called me one night, her voice trembling, saying she heard whispers in her room. Whispers that seemed to be calling her name. We were both living in a state of constant fear, and we didn't know how to stop it. One night, I woke to find deep scratches on my arms, scratches I couldn't explain. The following morning, Ashley showed up with bruises on her legs. We were both being marked by something unseen, something malevolent. The experiences we had at the hospital had followed us home, and they were getting worse. Desperate for answers, we did some research on the hospital's history. We found out it had been shut down after a series of gruesome events. Patients had reportedly disappeared, and there were rumors of unethical experiments conducted in the basement. The morgue, the very place we'd felt that sinister presence, had been the epicenter of these dark activities. Ashley and I were living in a nightmare, one we couldn't wake up from. Our adventure into the abandoned hospital had opened a door to something dark and relentless. After several months, Ashley and I began to notice that the strange things began to disappear, and our lives began to return to normal. The cat's behavior normalized, the whispers ceased, and the unexplained scratches and bruises stopped appearing. It was as if whatever malevolent force had followed us home had finally decided to release its grip. We still couldn't fully explain what had happened to us during those terrifying months, but we were grateful for the return of peace. Our harrowing experience left us with a deep respect for the unknown, and we vowed never to seek out such dangerous adventures again. The abandoned hospital, with all its dark secrets, was a place we would never forget, but it was also a place we never wanted to revisit. This happened years ago, when I was a teenager, back when my hometown was a mix of sleepy streets and whispered legends. The abandoned fabric factory, partially burned down in the 70s, stood as a silent sentinel of the past. Most of it lay in ruins, with fallen walls overrun by tall grass. But the main building and its towering chimney stubbornly resisted the decay of time. A newer-looking shack stood near the factory, a stark contrast to the old, crumbling structure. Locals shared ghost stories about the place, tales of apparitions and eerie sounds that kept kids like me and my friends at bay. Despite our fear, the thrill of the unknown held an irresistible allure. As a teenager, I found a different kind of thrill in graffiti, seeking the respect that came from tagging hard. To reach places, the factory wall became my white whale, the ultimate canvas for my art. One afternoon after school, driven by a mix of rebellion and curiosity, I decided to face my fears and leave my mark on the factory. I climbed the concrete fence, my heart pounding as I navigated through the tall grass towards the ominous building. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the crunch of my footsteps and the rustling of the wind through the overgrown weeds. Reaching the factory, I clambered up the half-destroyed walls, my hands trembling but determined. I quickly painted my tag, my cruise tag, and a peace symbol, the bright colors standing out against the weathered brick. As I finished, a movement near the shack caught my eye. Squinting through the dim light, I saw a figure, a tough-looking, dirty, middle-aged man in a battered leather jacket. He started yelling at me, his voice harsh and commanding. Panic surged through me. I didn't wait to hear what he had to say. Adrenaline took over, and I bolted, jumping down from the wall and sprinting through the tall grass. I could hear him cursing behind me, his footsteps pounding closer, with every ounce of fear and speed I could muster. I reached the fence, scaled it with a desperate agility I didn't know I possessed, and tumbled over to the other side. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of a nearby grocery store. Gasping for breath, I ducked behind a row of shopping carts, my heart hammering in my chest. I waited there, trembling and drenched in sweat, until I was sure the man wasn't following me. The next day, I convinced a couple of friends to check out the factory with me. We approached cautiously. But the place was deserted. The man was nowhere to be seen, and no signs of recent activity remained. Years later, I learned that squatters and junkies occasionally used the factory as a hideout. The man I encountered was likely one of them, and I shuddered to think what might have happened if I hadn't escaped. The factory held more than just the echoes of its haunted past. It was a refuge for the lost and the desperate, people who had slipped through the cracks of society. The thought of that encounter still sends chills down my spine. What if I had hesitated? What if I had approached him instead of running? I knew deep down that I'd probably have been beaten up or worse. The factory, with its eerie aura and dark history, was a place where the line between the living and the dead, the seen and the unseen, blurred into a terrifying, shadowy existence. It was a reminder that some places are abandoned for a reason, and sometimes it's best to leave the past undisturbed.